Okay, I see a lot of hands waving, I see people on telephones, but I'm going to assume we're just going to start, and it should be okay. I would like to welcome you all to this morning and early afternoon session on sustainability. Sustainability is a broad topic, and we have elected to to paint with a wide brush today, to look at sustainability from a number of different aspects. For many of us, sustainability is an energy issue, right? Is it sustainable to have an information society where the cloud computing required to support that society takes up all of the power of small towns in which the data centers are located? The answer is probably not. Is it sustainable to have democratic information systems that degenerate into anarchy because there are no protocols and there are no rules? Is it sustainable, right, to put all of our emphasis on advertising-based information systems rather than broader kinds of communication mechanisms? Energy is a part of that. As with looking at diversity, it's broader than gender. Sustainability has a wide range, and we're starting today with a talk of Professor Lorenz Hilty from the University of Zurich. We're very happy that he's here because he is somebody who can help us understand the broad impact of sustainability, focusing on the UN's sustainability goals, of which information technology plays an almost incidental role from the UN's perspective. If we look at the digital transformation of society, that needs to be put into a broader perspective, and I'm very pleased that Professor Hilty will be giving us that presentation. So I would like to welcome him to the stage. My name is Dick Balterman. I'm from the Centrum Wiskunde en Informatica and the Vrije Universiteit, the Free University in Amsterdam, and I'm the ringleader and the timekeeper for today. And we have 45 minutes for this first session, and we'll also have a panel session after lunchtime here, and that we'll have some more time to go into individual questions. So I would like to ask Professor Hilty, perhaps we could take away the, I don't know if we're supposed to take away the pop-up box here. There we go. Okay. Welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dick, for the kind introduction. And hello, everybody. So, I was really happy to hear that this year's European Computer Science Society conference has chosen to have Informatics for a Sustainable Future as this year's main theme. There is a growing political interest in the topic of digitalization with regard to sustainability. You see here that the World Economic Forum has devoted a report to this topic, and also the United Nations Policy Business Forum wrote about a case for a digital ecosystem for the environment. And last but not least, the German Advisory Council on Global Change, which advises the German government, has devoted an in-depth report called Our Common Digital Future. So it's a little bit difficult to me to read that and also to read that, so the setup is a bit, it's not so easy. Yeah, okay, but I try to remember what is on my slides. So in my talk, I will address these questions. So, what is sustainable development, and why is it difficult to achieve? What role has digital transformation played so far in achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and are we maybe missing an opportunity by underestimating the potential of digital technologies for sustainable development? So, to the first question. What is sustainable development and why is it so difficult to achieve? So, it all began in 1987 when the World Commission on Environment and Development, led by Gro Harlem Brundtland, delivered this report, Our Common Future. And here we find the definition that really coined the term sustainable development for the political discourse. Sustainable development is development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So the hard part is without compromising, because it would be easier, of course, to do justice to everyone in the present if we would not have to care about the future, for example, with regard to finite resources, especially to non-renewable resources. So, this is the basic definition. Just a second. Okay, it's a bit slow here, sorry. So we are slowing down. That's good for sustainability. So, and this is, these are the Sustainable Development Goals as they are part of the UN Agenda 2030. And this agenda was adopted by all UN member states, 193 member states in the year 2015. And so more than 1/3 of the time has already passed. And the progress, I must say, is not really great so far. So there is not so much time left to reach these goals. They range from reducing poverty and hunger via the climate action until up to peace, justice, and strong institutions. I always found that these goals look a little bit unstructured, actually, a little bit disorganized despite their neat design. And there is an institute, the Stockholm Resilience Center, who created a slightly more structured version, which helps a lot understanding the connections between all these goals. So here we have 3 levels that are connected. The basic level is the biosphere with 4 major goals. And then based on a functioning biosphere, there is human society with 8 goals. And as we all know, the economic system is a sort of a game we can play as a working society, besides other games like, for example, politics. So if we look at it like that, it's clear to understand why we should take care of the natural ecosystems, because they are sort of, to use a computer metaphor, they are the hardware, and society maybe could be seen as the system software and the economy as application software level for informatics people. Okay, and to understand how now the biosphere is connected to the other levels, we must understand the concept of social metabolism and the statistics of social metabolism. So this means, as you can see here, that society as a whole can be seen as an organism which is taking some inputs from the biosphere and creates some outputs to the biosphere. Again, all bound to the physical laws of thermodynamics. And the inputs are mineral ores, fossil fuels, biomass, and fresh water, basically. And the outputs are emissions to the air, solid and liquid wastes to the sinks. especially to soil and water. Okay, and now the digitalization, the digital transformation has been seen as a sort of a hope for decoupling our wealth, decoupling our production activities from the physical metabolism. And if we look at the statistics of on the input side of the social metabolism, it doesn't really look like decoupling. So what we see here is that for every year, the global rate of extracting natural resources from the lithosphere and the biosphere, so the biomass, the non-metallic minerals, the fossil fuels, of course, and the metal ores, that this is increasing year by year. And it has even accelerated after the year 2000, which is a bit strange because we would have said that their digitalization was starting maybe to really dematerialize somehow our value creation. But from a global perspective, it doesn't look like this. And of course, you can say that global GDP is still growing a little bit faster than resources extraction, so there is a so-called relative decoupling. But what we need would be an absolute decoupling, so we cannot grow the extraction rate of natural resources year by year as we are doing. Especially the fossil fuels should go down to zero very soon if we want to stop destabilizing the climate. So it seems to be really hard. In a recent report of the Stockholm Resilience Center to the Club of Rome, they also mentioned that the change that has been seen in the political and economic development of the last decades, that these change also with digitalization in mind is not deep enough to make the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals somehow realistic. So the deep change we would need in our socio-economic behavior is not yet seen. So what does this mean? And this brings me to the second question. What is the role of digital transformation so far in achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals? But it would be too easy to say, well, it didn't help anything. So let's have a more let's have a closer look to that, because there are some things that digitalization can do very, very well, and some other things where digital technologies are not so good at. And from a sustainable development perspective, it has always been clear that there are three strategies to sustainability that should be combined, yes? And efficiency is one of these strategies. So efficiency means producing more useful output per unit of input, very simple. And as we all know, we are quite good at that in digital technology. Sufficiency means that we are seeking enough where more would be possible. Consistency means that we make our social metabolism consistent, or you could also say compatible, with the natural metabolism of the biosphere, so that what we output can actually be, to a large extent, transformed back to new input for the technosphere. Okay. And as we all know, even within the digital technology, we are not really good at all these three things. Efficiency is just marvelous. I don't know if you have heard of Kumi's law. So this is about the increase of energy efficiency of computing. This is not Moore's law, okay? This is not Moore's law. This is not transistors per chip area. It is also not about computing power. Computing power would be computations per unit of time. This is computations per unit of energy. So if you give a computer 1 kilowatt hour of energy, you look what the processor will do with this 1 kilowatt hour. And this ranges from the ENIAC, where we were in the order of thousands, to the first microchip, where we were in the order of hundreds of millions, until today, where we are above a quadrillion of computations per kilowatt hour. So this is an efficiency revolution that has not happened in any other sector this way. So why is it not possible to use the power of this efficiency to become more sustainable? And this is just because we have no concept of what is enough. We have no concept of how to make our material flows compatible to the natural ecosystems. By the way, the same efficiency revolution happened not only in terms of energy, but also in terms of materials we are using. Yes. The computer power you get per kilogram microchips has also increased by a factor of 100 millions in 50 years. So you could hardly imagine another technology that is so resource efficient as digital hardware is. But let's cite one current example that shows why efficiency is not enough. It is because it creates a rebound effect. And this is the example. So we did a study for one large Swiss telecom provider, telecom operator, and we found out that the 5G mobile communication system, the 5G network, as it is planned for 2030, would be 6.7 times more energy efficient than today's network mix. It's actually not energy efficiency, but greenhouse gas efficiency, to be precise, yes? So we could transmit 222 gigabytes per kilogram of CO2 emission, or the other way around, if you want to express it as the greenhouse gas intensity, we could say that we emit 4.5 grams of CO2 equivalents per gigabyte transmitted through this future 5G network. But at the same time, the capacity planned for that new network is based on the assumption that traffic will increase by a factor of 9.3. So what does it mean? We will have efficiency, but we will emit more CO2 for mobile communications in 2030 than today. More, not less, because we are more efficient. And this is called the rebound effect. And the rebound effect is everywhere, also in traffic, I mean in physical traffic, everywhere, but especially in the ICT field. Of course, we are all aware that we have a sort of built-in and anticipated rebound effect. So what we would need is a sufficiency mindset that says, well, if we can grow something, we should not always take this opportunity for growth. We can also grow within the limits that the efficiency increase would allow for, and this would still be a lot. Yes? Or we could even reduce the emissions and the resource consumption. Okay, by the way, the materials efficiency, which was also growing enormously over the last decades, the materials efficiency has a dark side as well, and this is materials complexity. So we have, unfortunately, started using more than 50 metals to build digital electronics hardware, including very rare metals. And this makes recycling almost impossible. The first processors, the first microprocessors needed only 12 different metals. Now we are, as I said, we arrived at more than 50. And what does this mean for the recycling? So something is wrong with this slide. This is the metallurgical process to recover metals from e-waste, electronic waste. And that the message is that if there are 50 different elements in it that would be worth recycling, we can only get 15 to 17 out of it. So recycling is extremely limited in its possibilities, even under the most ideal industrial conditions, as it is shown here. But in most parts of the world, there is only an informal recycling sector where only copper and gold are recovered from electronic waste, which is extremely profitable in regions where there are low wages, and there is an informal sector that can do that without taking care of the health of these people and of the environment that is polluted by these activities. So in earlier years, my group did some studies about this informal e-waste recycling in India, in Africa, in South America. And it is really a big issue. And it shows, again, that we should not rely on an easy idea of closing these material loops, because even under industrial conditions, we have we are not yet closing the cycles. So we must be a little bit more creative in terms of circular economy than we are today. So, what does this all mean now for the relationship between the digital transformation and the Sustainable Development Goals? There is one study that had a closer look at this whole story. And this is, as mentioned before, the study Our Common Digital Future that was done by the German Advisory Council for Global Change. I know that this picture is not readable now. Yes. Even with a better projector, you could not read the small print. I tried to condense this in one table, what they found in this really useful study. But even this table takes 4 slides, so I will not read these 4 slides to you, but summarize a little bit. Sorry, I have to find my notes. So let's quickly go through it. So this was about the results about the economic goals. This is result about the social goals, and this is then about the biosphere level goals. Okay. And the overall result is that it is always good to create access. So digital technology is extremely good in creating access to resources for people. And by that, it can reduce inequalities. We also can reduce the burden of the inconsistency of our material flows. So, especially with new AI technologies, we have enormous possibilities of doing classifications, for example, in recycling. And as a future vision, we can think of better better use this potential also to close recycling loops. And there is a downside of the whole digital transformation where we must be careful, yeah? Especially not to create new dependencies, not to reinforce existing inequalities and creating new divides. So that's, in very, very brief, the whole result of that study. So, I come to my last question. So, are there maybe underestimated opportunities we should focus on more? And viewed from a sustainable development side, one of our biggest challenges in sustainability that connects many of the SDGs is creating food by agriculture for a growing world population, and the inconsistency of the material flows created there with the biosphere. So this is a threat to the climate, it's a threat to the biodiversity, and so on. And we are usually spraying 100% non-selective herbicides assisted by GMOs, which creates enormous problems and cannot go on like that. But there are weed robots. And weed robots are just based on the ability of digital technologies to make distinctions that we humans also can make, but it would be too expensive, yes? So if they make distinctions and can classify the plants they are seeing, and they can even work with solar energy slowly and steadily, if they do that, we can save up to 90% herbicides. So this would be a revolution, actually, in one of our biggest inconsistent material flows we have. Another interesting field where we should look at is the circular economy. If we manage to keep our material flows longer within the technosphere, although the end product is maybe inconsistent to the ecosystem, to the natural ecosystem, if we manage to do that, we can reduce the burden of this inconsistency dramatically. And there are so many internal circles of our economy that we could support with better ICT systems, like design for longevity, design for service instead of owning goods, the whole sharing economy discussion and the platforms. How can we make them really support sustainability and not just, again, creating efficiency for additional rebound effects? Design for reuse and manufactured design for material recovery in the end. And of course, this already exists. One of our largest material flows in the rich countries is construction and demolition waste. Yes, so what happens in the building sector is extremely relevant in terms of materials, steel, cement, wood, and there is a company from Helsinki, Sem Robotics, who has started developing such heavy recycling robots 10 years ago and is extremely successful. And I wonder why this is not yet a standard. So you could recycle so many things if you had recycling robots everywhere. So I think it was 6 or 7 years ago when I mentioned at the little workshop that maybe the future will be to have sort of recycling rats that wake up when there is enough solar and wind energy or excess energy, and then they wake up and start sorting waste. And I thought this was more of a joke, and a couple of years later I read it in the Oxford University Press blog that this is actually considered a good idea. Of course, they will not look like this little cartoon there. So I think that we really should focus our digital technology power on the fields where we can not only create efficiency, but also create consistency of material flows. So, the conclusion of all that is that that we could apply some principles as computer scientists, as informatics professionals. We could promote efficiency with regard to energy or materials resource input only when there is some constraint that hinders demand to grow faster than efficiency would allow for. So, in short, combine efficiency with sufficiency. Second, we should use the ability of digital technologies to make efficient automated distinctions or classifications to reduce the inconsistency of social metabolism and not to induce more consumption. So use efficiency for consistency, not for classifying people's behaviors to make them consume, to nudge them to consume more. Third principle, promote accessibility of information, of markets, of shareable resources, but only if this increases equality and reduces existing divides. And also we should do this only if it can really be scaled up. So not everything can be scaled up to the whole world population. So we should focus on these things like access to education, for example, that can be scaled up to large numbers of people. So use the technology to reduce inequality. And fourth, avoid creating dependency and addiction of to consuming specific services that are offered by digital technology. So preserve the freedom of choice and also maybe avoid surveillance that also endangers other freedoms. So this is essentially my message. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, to simplify the communications, we're going to do the questions and answers as a tag team here. I will go through. There are some microphones here, and I believe there are people with microphones for questions here, and we have somebody from the Informatics Europe staff who is handling questions through the network. First, I'd like to say thank you very much for a fascinating talk that touches on really some of the fundamental issues. Some of the illustrations were difficult to read, but it would be very nice if we could have a copy of those, and for those who would like to download them, take a look. You know, there are a number of really fundamental issues that are addressed here, and I'm very pleased to have this as the sort of kickoff talk today. We do have time for some questions. If there are questions from the room, or Wiener, if there are questions from abroad, let me know. Gregor?
Yes, thank you for the nice talk. To focus a lot on these digital technologies, and as computer scientists, I'm more and more speaking about the humans who are using these technologies. And I think sustainability is also very much concerned with the workforce or the working conditions of humans. And so, what is your opinion about this? What can we do that we have sustainable humans or work participants?
Yes, first of all, I think that HCI does a great job also in taking care of sustainability aspects in human-computer interaction. But there is, of course, more to say about that, because automation, and especially with the new wave of AI, we will have a huge wave of automation. I think this will just force us as societies to think in a new way about what work means and how to distribute income in society. In all societies, we also have a huge informal sector. So there is a lot of work to do in our societies, yeah? Raising children, caring of older people and all such things. So there is not a lack of demand for work. It's just a question of how we distribute income in a society where we will coexist with more automated, even more automation than today. I think it's a political question, not a technical one.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the room here? Vinti, do we have any questions from the network? Not yet. So I have, I'm increasingly positive about care for the elderly. So that's an area that I would expect a lot of growth in the future. If I look at the talk, and I was struck by the efficiency slide of computing power per kilowatt of energy. Yet at the same time, there's a code bloat that the amount of code and the amount of instructions that we need, right? There seems to be very little focus on efficiency and more on general productivity. And there are so many computer cycles that are available that nobody really cares if you use packages and packages and packages of other people's code where no one knows exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. Do you have any insight if that's a sustainable approach, or will there be a new version of algorithmics that forces us to think about algorithm and implementation efficiency again, so that we don't have the 3G or the 5G problem of increased computing power that is actually just supporting inefficient code rather than more efficient implementations? Do people care about that?
Thank you, that's an excellent question. There is this whole field of green software engineering. Your colleague Patricia Lago, for example, is one of the actors in this field. I think that we had when the first smartphones were developed, we had such a pressure to think about really doing efficient implementations. And then there came the mobile internet access with the cloud in the background, and now we don't have to care about this again, because everything what the app wants to do is done, or can be done in the cloud. And so I think, yes, this is still, of course, a field where we should make progress and maybe think of software engineering also from the perspective of not only to save energy, but also not to create demand for larger hardware capacities, because we have this bloat from version to software bloat from version to version. You know that everything. You know all of how this was in the past, that we are more or less forced buying newer, more powerful hardware just to run essentially the same as before, and we should also become aware of that problem and maybe think that software progress could also mean to do the same with less hardware. Right. And this would solve a larger problem than the energy only, yeah, because the hardware has to be produced, and an end user device through the whole lifetime uses less than 10% of the energy that was used to produce it. So it is not exactly true for servers, but for end-user devices, the energy and carbon rucksack with which you buy the device already is larger than what you usually can spend in terms of energy during the lifetime.
Okay, so that, and sort of one standard question, I think, for all of our speakers today, or actually one of our speakers today has a question, or Frank, yeah?
I didn't interrupt your question, but on your last slide, you said, well, we will only reach sufficiency if there is some constraint. That was, I think, the first bullet of your final slide. Of course, I couldn't disagree with that, but that raises the question, what should that constraint be? What would be a reasonable source of constraints that would limit?
Yes, so, yeah.
And if I could, that was actually going to be a part of my last question. In a society where information is free, right? Or where the perception is that information is free, where information storage is free, right? iCloud gives you gigabytes, terabytes. We're sponsored by the IBM Cloud, so we should mention the IBM Cloud, right? Which has tremendous amounts of capacity, but actually is an incredibly inefficient storage model, right? What kind of incentives can we have? And do you have any insights?
So first of all, I think it's still more efficient to grow in terms of data transmission and data storage than to grow in terms of air traffic or something like that. So there is a huge gap. So we are actually on the good side if you look inside the ICT sector. But still, of course, we have no incentive to be sufficient. Yes, in the sense of sufficiency as I presented it. And so where can, in a market economy, sufficiency come from? Yes, because if, as soon as you can make something faster, cheaper, smaller, lighter, or so on, then you will sell more. Yeah? So where can sufficiency come from? In a market economy, it's about the price. So if we would really have a price, a meaningful price for CO2 emissions or for scarce metals, then this would, through the economic game, would somehow then also find its way to the consumer and regulate in a way we cannot foresee, but it would have some regulating effect in this complex system. And if you don't trust in the market economy because we have too many monopolies and such things that let the markets fail, then we must think of other political instruments that somehow put limits. Yes, but I would not start with these limits necessarily in the IT sector, but maybe first in the things that are heavy, like agriculture and constructing buildings, and these are the heavy things, and traffic, of course, physical traffic. Yeah.
Okay, and the last observation is, Wieneke, the almost last observation. We have a question from the highly efficient Zoom world.
Exactly. We have a question from Professor Mühlhäuser, which is our next speaker from the University of Darmstadt, and he asks, an increasing number of academic colleagues, not from the informatics field, claim that the sustainability gains coming from digitization will be more than eaten up by the increased resource consumption needed by informatics to introduce sustainability. He says, I don't believe it, but could you give a rationale or even numbers for this?
I'm not sure whether I understood it correctly, but I think the essence was that if we now enter this politics which wants to use digitalization to support sustainability, will this not have to create a footprint on the IT side that is too high to be worth it? Okay, so this is a question that has to be looked at very. So we have to differentiate between different things here, because, for example, we have done study about media. Is it really better to read a book on an e-book reader than a printed book? And there you can see it doesn't matter so much. So it depends how long you keep the e-book reader. And after book number 33, roughly, for an average book, it is better to do it electronically than to print books. But who keeps a reader for 33 books? Maybe not. So, so it's not. But if we compare Zoom video conferencing or other types of video streaming with physical travel, it's absolutely clear that the virtual version is the winner. So although there has been some confusion in the media about this, even under very pessimistic assumptions about how the internet nodes are loaded, etc., even under pessimistic assumptions, it is still the worst thing how you can spend your time is sitting on a plane. So that's unfortunately true. Yes, you could for every 25 seconds you are sitting on a plane, you could print a book. So an intercontinental flight is something like burning a little library. For one flight from Zurich to New York, you could have 500 hours of video conferencing. No, 5,000 hours of video conferencing under worst assumptions about the efficiency of video conferencing. So it depends on what you look at. If you train deep machine learning, deep learning models, yes, then it is known that this can create enormous amounts of energy consumption in the cloud. Yes, if you do Bitcoin mining with this proof of work algorithm, it is clear that this is retrospectively has been a bad idea because if you cannot really scale this up. Yes, we already know Bitcoin mining already needs more energy than the whole Netherlands, as far as I know, but maybe it's even more, yeah.
Okay. Well, we'd like to keep some of that energy for the Netherlands. So the last question is, should we be optimistic or pessimistic? And you have only one answer.
We should always be optimistic. There is no alternative.
We should be optimistic. There's no alternative. Professor Hilty, thank you very much for your presentation, and we appreciate your coming here by train. And you've had words that I think are very important and a very nice way to kick off our session today. So one more round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Okay, some excess energy in the cloud. We will have a panel discussion after lunch today, and if you want to think of some issues, then we'll be able to touch back on some of these topics later on. The second presentation of today is by Professor Max Mühlhäuser. Professor Mühlhäuser is an old friend of mine and a colleague in a number of disciplines. He's going to argue in his talk that we need to elevate sustainability to an academic area of study within the region of informatics. It should probably be an academic area of study across all regions, but he's giving his presentation, and in my efficient preparation, I don't have the title of his talk handy, but luckily he's going to give the talk, so he'll tell us what the title is. The handover moments of these kind of presentations are always exciting. I see the talk here, Interaction and Representation Challenges of Sustainability-Related Information, the Quest for Usable Sustainability. And Max, I'd like to welcome you and introduce you to our audience here and across Zoom from Darmstadt.
Okay, today I want to make a statement that might be astonishing in the context of informatics and sustainability. Let me go ahead with my slides. This is just a mention for the licensing. We're talking about sustainability, right? Let me call it green as a synonym for just a few minutes. And I think we have just discussed in a nice way that informatics itself needs a focus on sustainability, on green. And we have seen that for some fields like networking, we are still growing in our demands. We have seen this 5G example very nicely laid out on the last talk. But we also know that we have fields where we are using resources really in excess. And indeed, in the discussion, we have heard about Bitcoin, which is my example here also, where we have already bypassed the Netherlands. Actually, we are now at a stage where, which is equivalent to the power consumption of Poland. And it's still growing at fast pace. So there are definitely things in informatics going on that we cannot really judge or justify with regard to sustainability. On the other hand, definitely green and sustainability needs informatics. This seems to be obvious, but let me try to point out one particular issue. When we say green, then of course we know that this is threatened by all the things humans are producing and doing. So we have a big impact on the world's climate, the world's resources, etc. Now the point is, what are we actually doing? Where does it come from? And the answer to my question at the last talk was pointing that out. It really depends on a lot of things. So when we look at these clouds here, we don't even know at first sight, is this mainly a CO2 global warming issue, what we are producing from these chimneys here? Or is it rather an issue of pollution that comes out of those chimneys? We have to check, right? And if we look closer at sustainability issues, we realize that there are so many dangers, there's so many issues that come up, and we often have difficulty understanding what are the causes and what are the effects, right? And there's not only public debate, there's even serious debate among experts, like in the automotive industry. You know, there's still camps that would defend the conventional powered vehicles, you know. Then on the other hand, there is hydrogen as one possibility, and it is totally unclear whether in the long run it will outpace and outperform electromobility. This shows us that even the experts don't know exactly what are the effects and the causes, and when they have causes, then there might be causes behind, which are actually the root causes that we have to address. And even if we understand those, we have to understand the effect sizes in order to see where we really have to pull the lever in order to have a great positive effect on lowering our emissions and our damage to the environment. Where does sustainability efforts, where do they really pay off? So there's a lot of questions to ask. There's a lot of insights to gain. And therefore, in one phrase, we need lots of information coming from really reliable data. So if we look at even our daily life, whether we use a phone like here, the Fairphone, or we are considering a more analog example, which is our eating habits and so on, then we might even encounter a label that tells us that something is organic, that something looks sustainable. But again, to take this everyday life example, what do we learn from this label? Is it about the production of this good that we are about to consume? Does it include a consideration of the packaging? What about the logistics chain? How far, where does it come from? What is the effect of logistics on the environment? When we use the product and consume it, you know, how much waste do we produce? What about recycling? We got examples in the last talk. And so if we then look for root causes, we will find many, many more. So we are in a complex situation where we need a lot of information. And of course, linked to this is economic and legal information that we also need to consider, and the many, many stakeholders that make decisions in this entire environment, including, of course, the end users that I choose as an example here. And once we have understood all this, we have to understand the alternatives. So if I think something is bad for the environment, how much do I know about the existing alternatives to make a good choice? And how do I know about potential alternatives in order to direct research to come up, R&D to come up with better alternatives in the future? So the message I want to convey here is that it's all about very complex information, and just labeling or tracing in a simple way can help a bit, but it's not sufficient neither for the many decision makers and along the entire economic chains, nor for the end users that need to be informed in order to make good informed decisions. So with this in mind, we can ask which fields of informatics are really necessary for improving sustainability. And of course, the answer is all of these. We need IoT and cyber-physical systems for better data gathering, for better sensing and understanding what's going on. We need artificial intelligence and machine learning to come up with better solutions fast, but also classical algorithms. We need workflow management to do all the tracing of what's going on along the chains to really follow back to the roots of everything. So this is rather clear. The point I want to make today is that we have to make a focus also on HCI. And the last talk nicely mentioned that humans are in the loop and humans are important for everything here. And of course, HCI has also a big need in becoming more intelligent. But I don't have the time today to go into depth with this. Let me just mention it here. We have to not only convey information, we have to assist in providing the right information at the right time to reduce the information to the essence. We have to incentivize people and even in the long run, make persuasive computing in order to change habits in the long run, and not just by, bringing about one shocking information that will change their habits for a few days and then they go back. And indeed, I think we have to look at the humans and go deep in their psychology, because we live in a hedonic society, and the society is more and more divided between the more fun society people and the more sustainability concerned people that are often considered to be the fun spoilers. So we have two camps here, which is not going to do us any good in the future. So getting the humans in the loop is one of the most important things here. So that is my claim for usable sustainability, and therefore I'll concentrate on HCI for the rest of the talk. Now, looking at HCI, let's go a bit deeper and look at the development of HCI. Where are we and where do we have to go with respect to sustainability? Look at this picture here, which I borrowed from SEA, an R&D institute in Portugal, that invented a new local currency, which they call AIR. You see it on the top right. It's the abbreviation for "Are you ready?" And AIR is a kind of local dollar, local currency that you can earn by, for instance, taking sustainability-friendly mobility choices, like taking public transport or riding the bike, etc. And you can accumulate these dollars and then spend them on rebates for your rentals, for bike rentals, for bus rides, etc. But also in local stores and in shops that sell sustainability conscious products, etc. So with this currency, they are trying to change the habit and behavior of people in certain urban environments. But of course, that needs, that information is conveyed. And in this picture here, we see, that they can compare their own behavior to others and thereby get incentivized to perform better with respect to their friends or certain groups, etc. Now, the point is, this picture here is mounted. There is no technology for providing an information like this today, mapped onto the real world. There is in part, we have made progress with ARKit and ARCore by the big vendors, but we are not really ready to display something like this easily. And if you look closely, it's not even very good, because it's hard to attribute the information to the individuals you see in this scenery. What I want to show with this picture is that we have to move towards a much better integration of the digital information, if you wish, the cyber information, and the physical world, because sustainability is all about our physical world, and the related information has to be wrapped around and integrated and melted with the physical environment. Now, if we look at the history of HCI, that's not something that we have at our fingertips. If you look briefly, we started 25 years after World War II. We had basically paper as not only the output medium, but also the input medium. So I/O was basically based on paper. And then we had 15 years of character cell terminals. We had 15 years of graphical user interfaces, windowing systems with the advent of the mouse. And all this was basically one dominating I/O paradigm for, in the beginning, 25 years, and then 2 times 15 years. And I still remember the move from character cell terminals to GUIs. And actually, one of the big fallacies in computer science education is that computer science students today get educated with the idea of a character cell terminal, of a console that they read from and that they write to, which is totally archaic. It takes them a couple of semesters until they finally learn how to program a GUI, which is absolutely insane. Now, one more important point is that starting in 2000, we had much more of a proliferation. Before, we had one paradigm per 15 years, and now suddenly we have the GUIs, and in parallel we have touch. Touch itself is proliferating. We now have flexible displays for foldables and rollables. We have large display support. We have pens and fingertips. We have support for groups in different ways. So many things are going on in the HCI world. There is not such a thing as a single dominating paradigm anymore. Nevertheless, up until this whole time, up until 2020, if you wish, ranging over 50 years, we were displaying information on a monitor, on a display, and thereby on a glass wall. Whether it is conventional or touch-based, there is this glass wall between the information and the human. Okay, so the digital world is behind the glass wall, the human and the physical world are in front of the glass wall. So for 50 years, we had glass walls separate the analog and the human world from the digital world. And if you look at this fingertip here, we give the illusion that the finger is actually manipulating the digital information, but the reality is that the finger cannot reach into the digital information, and the digital information cannot reach out into our physical world, which is absolutely a prerequisite for coping with the huge amount of information that we have to deal with when talking about sustainability. So the essential point is to be able to break that glass wall and to come up with a tight integration of digital and physical world. So 50 years behind glass HCI, and now we want to break this glass wall. I call this immersive HCI, and you can already see that I'm moving towards VR and AR, but we are not there yet. We have beginning solutions, and of course, it's always important to look at hands and eyes interfaces, because that's our dominant way of interacting with the physical world, but also with computers. In addition, we now have more and more impact from voice assistants. And finally, we have to reach out to our own body and the space among us, and all this has to become part of HCI in the midterm. And only by this we can really merge the physical and the digital world and come up with what I would call cyber-physical HCI, where the atoms and the bits are really melted and become one. If you wish, we can quickly look at a few ongoing research activities. When doing so, then please don't get distracted by the clumsy lab prototypes. You know, we have seen a long way from the left to the right picture, which is still somewhat futuristic. It exists, but still through the glass wall with AR Core and AR Kit by Apple and Google. But in the end, what we want to have is, you know, a consistent merging of digital and physical images, and not through the glass wall of our smartphones or tablets. So don't get distracted by clumsy, you know, head-mounted displays, etc. These things will go away. Nevertheless, we have them today, and the way we interact with this three-dimensional world is still inferior to what we need. We use, of course, some kinds of goggles, and we use mainly our hands or otherwise controllers to interact with that world, right? But with that, we have only cyber touch and cyber gestures. We are not really moving a lot beyond what we had in 2D with these glass walls. So one important step forward is to really use more of our body, starting with the upper limbs, where we can or cannot be assisted by, for instance, smartwatches and other means of measuring our arm movements, etc. Let me just give you a little insight. And by this, we can also move out and go towards HCI on the go. Cyber-physical and upper limb interaction is, as I said, one next step. Let me explain that briefly. This lady here is on the go, on her way, and she uses not only just a hand gesture, a touch gesture, but the entire upper limbs to interact. And doing that, the information at your fingertips and at your hands and arms is much more concise, and there's a lot more you can do, like in this example. With just some waving, you can switch back and forth between totally different sets of applications and activities, and then by doing some Z-axis movements, you can then select the precise activity. You can use that for many different applications, be it in a continuous model, like in this case here, a photo where we adjust the hue and saturation of the photo, or in discrete environments like you know, scanning through your contact list, or in a maps environment. There are many applications, even the classical keyboards, where we can, you know, make use of that Z-axis and of the entire three-dimensional space that we can reach out to with our upper limbs. Okay, and of course, behind this, there are many HCI research questions, which is why we researchers in HCI get involved in this and have many questions to answer in order to make this really useful. You know, what is the real reach here? How many discrete objects can we place in this reach, etc.? What is the X and Y axis? What is a comfortable interaction distance, etc., etc. After the upper limbs, let's look at the lower limbs, because that can make you interact even better on the go in an urban environment where you go shopping, where you walk, and you have to make decisions all the time, especially sustainability related decisions now. Let's look at why this is important. You know, if you're on the move, you're concentrated on things, you're carrying things, your hands may not be easily free. So the question is, can we use, for instance, our feet and use that for instance, selecting information on the go easily while we are carrying things, while we're looking at things. the research questions behind are related, for instance, to whether we want to use this via direct interaction, which means we are looking at that menu that we are touching with our foot toes, or can we do that in an interactive way, so we can continue to look ahead, to look at traffic and at what we are doing, while we're implicitly with our feet selecting information and interacting with the digital world. And the hypothesis is that indirect interaction can be done. When you go deep and do research on this, many questions again come up, you know, the same kind of questions that we had before. How many different items can you easily and comfortably and reliably select and interact with? And for that, of course, we do our studies. And there's still a long way to go, because in the first set of studies, we found out that this indirect way, so you can continue to look at the environment and do this implicitly with your feet, is a lot worse. You know, just look at the lower row, which is indirect information, where you see in these large bubbles that you have much more uncertainty because you don't see directly what's going on. But that is due to you know, a step in our research that's still premature, because as you see here, the studies were done without feedback on where the feet are. You know, only when they were tapped there was feedback. So that's probably due to a wrong setup for the controlled experiment here. And we can still hope that this is a very nice way of interacting on the go while you keep your head up. Another way is to even interact with digital information by walking. So the thing we have seen up to now was you do tapping. But now imagine you have a choice among different things, and in front of you, you see these colored paths. So depending on which path you choose and where you keep walking on that path, you select different alternatives. And again, research has to find out, you know, how do we arrange this on a sidewalk? How many different lanes can we afford? How long do we have to keep people walking on that lane in order to avoid erratic input, etc.? Many of these things. The last point I want to make is, up to now, we have looked at ways for my body to interact still with digital information that might be wrapped over physical information, but there's no direct cyber-physical interaction with the real world. In order to get to that, we have to move towards additive manufacturing, 3D printing, etc. And the first step here is to have the physical and the digital information still meet on the glass wall, but in a much more immersive way. Let me make this fast and show it by this example of telechess. Look at these chess figures that the lady is going to touch. You see that those are interactive. So as you touch a chess figure, the computer is actually perceiving it, and your telechess partner has the same kinds of figures. What the telechess partner is doing appears on your screen. Let me show that again. Appears on your screen as augmented reality, but your own chess figures are haptic, and they are still interactive. So as you see here, when you touch them, the system, the algorithms behind understand your moves and understand the position of your figures. It can also help you and show you good moves, etc. This principle we have largely improved over the last years, so that today we can even build very small interactive objects and still distinguish them, still find their position and track them on the interactive surfaces. So it's now really a fast process. This, of course, is fast forward, but there are many applications for that. As you see in this picture, on the lower left you see gaming, on the upper left you see a musical instrument selection and adjustment. On the upper right you see again an educational example. On the lower right, you see the person use 3D printed objects in order to work on a PDF, etc. So there are many applications for that that make the physical and digital world come together much more closely. But with that, we were still interacting with the glass wall because we needed that, because we need a computer somewhere. Now, in the next step, of course, we want to integrate the computer with the 3D printed object. And in order to do so, if you want to integrate electronics in a 3D printed object, it's normally very clumsy and cumbersome. And therefore, we came up with a specialized target board that is magnetic and that you can snap on any 3D printed object. Here you see in black the interactive parts. So these would sense your touch and touch gestures, etc. Also deformation and all the interactions you can do with the 3D printed object. And down here you have a PC board that can automatically be snapped onto that object magnetically, so that your development and design process starts by importing a 3D model. You add the interactivity, and then you add the magnetic connectors. And that is the design part of the process. And after that comes printing, like in this example, a little fun kids piano. You snap the board onto it, and you have a ready-made, self-contained 3D printed physical object. Okay, and finally, I don't have the time for that. Sustainability also means we have to improve the HCI for the more sustainable means that we provide. For instance, we all want people to move to bikes and e-scooters, etc. But there's a huge safety gap for those with respect to cars that are today much more equipped with safety features than bikes, for instance. And that's something where we have to work on very hard in order to bring more safety to these sustainable means of transportation. So let me summarize. Usable sustainability, in my view, is something that we have to stress and to support a lot more, and we have to think about chairs for usable sustainability to come up in informatics very soon. Remember, usable security. It took decades when we had security solutions and people didn't use them because they were very hardly usable. When we do so, we have to consider that HCI has departed from the behind glass interaction and is rapidly moving onto immersive interaction. I showed you a number of challenges in the talk, but I don't want to not mention that we have, of course, a threat in the time frame of acceptable devices. That's clear. That's one of the big hurdles in this. But there are huge investments, especially in the US, to come up with better devices for augmented and virtual reality. Here we have an opportunity for a key element of digitization in industry and life that can move our sustainability efforts very much forward. Thank you very much. And I don't want to leave out the credit to all the people who have contributed to this. And with that, I thank you for listening, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you for your talk. There seems to be a feedback issue someplace, so we've got to be careful in terms of how to manage your and my input here. Let me start by asking the session here if there are any questions. Gregor, our man with questions, if you won't. And heaven only knows how this communication is going to work out, but.
Okay, so thank you. Also from my side, Max, here's Gregor Engels from Paderborn. Thank you for your talk. Can you hear me? Okay, okay. Yeah, okay. You were saying that green needs informatics, and I don't see that you understand me. Okay, more or less. So my question is, what do you say? Oh. My question is, no, not better? No, the echo.
Go ahead, it's a
yeah.
echo, but I
okay.
think I can decouple it.
Okay, so my question is, I think green needs ecosystems research, means many different disciplines to understand sustainability, not only informatics, of course informatics, but maybe also psychology, sociology, economy. If we don't have good business models, then we can have excellent technologies, but nobody will use it and we don't know whether it's of benefit. So would you agree that we say green needs interdisciplinary research, so research from many disciplines?
Absolutely, and we are used to coming up with new studies for our students, like mechatronics was invented as an interdisciplinary field, but we are not so good yet in bringing together PhD students and young researchers in an interdisciplinary way. For instance, here in Germany, we have DFG, our funding agency, and they would always invite you to do interdisciplinary research. But I've tried this for 4 decades now, and I would say I'll never try it again. What you can do is to do research in one field and invite a portion of researchers from other disciplines. That will work. But if you come up with a totally interdisciplinary research agenda, you will not find reviewers that will like you extremely, because they always defend their own discipline and they want the money to go to their discipline. And if they are faced with an application where, say we have 5 disciplines, so only 20% of the money goes to one discipline, they will just not like it. So we have to change our attitude coming from the funding agencies even. And then we can fund truly interdisciplinary research by PhD students, young researchers, and that's the way to go. I fully support what you said, but it's truly not so easy as we would think.
Labeling of a bag of nuts or of some fruit or whatever it was with a vegan label or some sort of production label to say that this was sustainable food. If you were to look at your own HCI experiments, right, how would you label them to show a positive or negative impact from an energy or other sustainability measures of moving away from glass? Glass is just a representation of moving away from paper. Some pre-processed but rarely not very flexible form of information presentation. But the amount of energy, the amount of back-end storage, the amount of back-end processing that these new interfaces would do, they would undoubtedly have a productivity increase. But is this a solution looking for a problem? And what is the cost of this solution? With respect to the more conventional, even if they're behind the glass mechanisms.
You got me at a very good point, honestly, because indeed, without doubt, these new technologies need at least way more bandwidth, not to speak of the devices themselves and the materials they use, etc. So without a closer look, I would definitely say to start with, they are making the sustainability equation worse in HCI. So this definitely calls for heavy research in this direction. On the other hand, I try to point out that we need new ways to cope with huge amounts of information, and the reality in sustainability is that we are all, steering through a very foggy field where, we have pieces of information, we get messages from the media, from some, different camps that argue one way or the other. And we definitely need to cope with such information on a daily basis in the way, we are walking through the world, we are interacting with the physical world, and digital information has to come closer to the physical world. And therefore, for me, there is no way around it, and it's really not a solution looking for a problem. On the other hand, I fully agree that to start with, it's probably going to be more environmentally unfriendly, and we have to make an effort to change that, definitely.
Okay, I'm putting on my environmentally friendly microphone. Let me ask Wieneke if there are any questions from out. Max, I'd like to pause at this point, and we'll see you back after our lunch when we get a chance to talk about a number of issues. I would like to thank you, and I'd like to thank Professor Hilty for their technology-driven presentations for this first part of our session. In the second part of the session, we're going to look more at policy issues and answer the question of not only what is change, but how do you motivate change, and how do you bring change into a process, and then we'll be able to bring those topics together after lunch in our panel. Max, thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation and your time being here. It's unfortunate that you're not with us. The downside of energy efficiency. And I hope that you make yourself a cup of coffee while we go outside and get some coffee ourselves. Thank you, and let's give Max some applause that hopefully he can hear this time. So.
Thanks a lot.